so that I make
experienced amateur.
Yeah, and I'm an amateur. I'm an amateur expert.
Which one's better?
I don't know. Like, I don't know what I don't know. That makes me more dangerous.
We're very impressed by one another. Is how that works out.
So first of all, I want to thank you because this is absolutely experimental. We're going to see how this goes. I have no idea. I'm not 100% certain what the audience here is going to be like, whether it's people who know you, I don't care. Whether it's people who don't know you, I don't care.
It's YouTube, it'll be everything.
Or no one.
No, it's never no one.
I'm really glad that you actually were willing to talk to me. I mean, it helps that you're family, and full disclosure.
It's the first time we probably have really sincerely talked, except for last night, for years.
I mean, well, we don't see each other very often.
We don't see each other very often, and I see your parents quite a bit because they were mentors. We've kept in touch.
Yeah. Well, I saw you far
more.
more.
And they visit us in New Orleans a lot.
Well, but I saw you a lot more as a kid, certainly, than I ever did as an adult. So, we've both gone our separate ways. But we met up at very interesting points in your life, too. Like, I remember when you came through Ypsilanti to do that show. And if you probably don't remember one of a million, but you were opening for the Demolition Doll Rods.
Demolition Doll Rods, yeah.
Yeah, interesting group.
They reformed recently, the Demolition Doll Rods.
Do they still perform mostly naked?
Mostly naked. We're going to see them in Europe. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. And they've got to be now in their 50s, too.
Yep. And Margaret Dollrod don't give a shit.
I love it.
She's a genius.
Yeah, I think it's... I remember it was a very interesting show. And so, But one of the things that has been, and one of the things I think I want to start exploring in this kind of format and show is a couple of things. Really how people, we've got a television show we're working on that involves nurture versus nature. The whole idea of creativity, is it where you grow up or is it your genes and stuff? And I think it's both. I think the whole point is it's a stupid idea to try and take that apart, that we are both nurture and nature. In your case, I have some interesting background in how you actually grew up. And you've actually spent a lot of time kind of trying to, up till recently, kind of just shrouding some of that. Why?
I don't know if I was trying to shroud. You mean by changing my name?
Not even that. For a long time, didn't you kind of just avoid talking about history or kind of creating a past that was more interesting for you?
Yeah, because I feel like as an artist, it's unimportant to you. But it's in you, so of course it's important and it's formative. But I've never been a stickler for reality in general. As an artist, it's our job to kind of weave better worlds for ourselves and for our communities and for the audience. But I've never been ashamed of my family or my past or anything. And I don't really see it as trying to shroud it, but it's definitely also like when you're young, in your 20s or a teenager, that all of your impulses are to become your own man or your own person and to get away from that. And I think it's a really natural, normal thing to say that has nothing to do with me. I am creating myself. I am my own person.
Well, and it's interesting because I taught middle school obviously for years before I became a psychiatrist, and as an adolescent psychiatrist, I do the same thing. But I'm always telling parents, I'm saying like, look, it's the kid's job to push all the boundaries. That's their job. That's what they're doing. They're a teenager. It's our job to push them back in a way that it becomes a dance between the two, so that there's a healthy. But that doesn't always happen. A lot of times it's a really intense battle, and that was something I wondered. Did you struggle more with that?
It was an intense battle.
Yeah.
With my mother.
Yeah.
It was a very intense battle. Before this interview, I was like, I'm not going to talk about my mother, and that's the first thing I want to talk about. I grew up in a conservative household, so I never ever thought of it as conservative. It was just my family household, and it seemed very normal, except for some behavior or some sort of clash that my mother and I had that seemed. That was very disruptive for me.
And by the way, just mentioning that, because I think normal is what you experience. I mean, it's weird. Is from my job, I hear so many different views of normal, and I go, wow, that's not how I would have seen it. So you grew up in a normal household, which actually was. It was kind of it was a
suburban, small ranch house in a suburb of St. Louis, and in that way, I guess it's like classic normal American, upbringing.
Yeah, I mean, it really was.
Yeah.
You're not classic normal American. So how is it? Tell me that. So what?
I think I am classic normal American. I think that a lot of, artists and musicians are born out of, at least in my generation, born out of suburbia. Maybe because they're reacting against it, but probably also a lot because they have the privilege to relax and be an artist because of a semi-stable upbringing.
Absolutely.
You can't ignore that is a factor.
It's certainly a factor in a certain type of art because, we see art comes from across the bound, from poverty all the way up to wealth. But it's definitely different because you're right. You had the, in the, I don't know if you're familiar with like the whole idea of hierarchy of needs. We talked actually about that the other night. We were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and one is you got to be able to eat. And then then you can think about safety, and then you can think about comfort, and then you can think about working on your brain. But you can't do all those things, if you're starving to death.
Yeah, but where is art in that hierarchy?
I don't know.
I don't think it's at the top. And I've seen a lot of, stuff lately just on the internet or whatever that art is a luxury of the wealthy. And I
disagree.
absolutely don't think that
I completely disagree
bullshit,
too. Yeah.
That it comes in for those that are driven to it just above food and shelter.
So I'm going to tell you what I think
and
about
sometimes before.
Well, so you've keyed on to something I've been talking about a lot, which is coping mechanisms and coping skills. That's my big focus in psychiatry is coping skills. To me, absolutely art is a coping skill. And a coping skill is something that helps you overcome horrible adversity or things in your life so you're right. I think maybe being able to buy art and hang it on your wall may be more along of what people are seeing, but not the creation of art.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm in a position to say whether it was a coping skill for me or not. It was a compulsion, and that compulsion brought conflict with certain members of my family.
But did your art help you survive?
Well, yeah, and it still does.
Yeah.
It is how I make a living, and how I've made a living 100% is hustling as an artist and mostly as a musician since I was 20.
Well, maybe even younger. But I mean, I remember going back to that time we were playing with that
I'm talking
multi-track.
survival, like
as in financial
buy food,
survival.
Pay the rent, all that.
But then let's go back further to when you were younger, and you were a creative person. You were an artist, at least whatever that means. You were somebody who was driven to create, even when we were in middle school and stuff, and we did that multi-track recording on that thing. I mean, you were
Chernobyl.
Oh, Chernobyl.
A song about Chernobyl. You knew what Chernobyl was, and I was like. Or maybe we were both just figuring it out, but it was in the news, and I was like, whoa, this is heavy.
Well, and it was, I remember I had that tape until college, or late college, so I'd play it every now and then and go, that was pretty wild.
Do you remember the tune?
Sort of.
I remember Oh, Chernobyl, oh, Chernobyl.
Is there a tune?
That was kind of like a mantra chanting song, and it was like a lament of two dorky 14-year-olds
I wish
or whatever.
I still had that.
But it was a good hook.
But
very Manson-y hook.
No, but you were always, once again, I don't want to say a rebel, that's not necessarily the word, but rebelling against stuff that was going on. And I think creativity at that time it's what we would talk about most of the time, music or certain groups or what you were listening to or what things were going on. I can't see it as anything except a way of surviving under circumstances which you weren't comfortable.
I suppose it was, but at least to me, music was my whole world. That was the newspaper, and it's pre-internet, of course, but that's how my ideas were formed. That's how what I felt was important and what wasn't important came into form in my mind, and my concept that there can be poetry is all through music and lyrics.
How are you different now? Because, you've come into your own. I'm going to preface this for a minute because I want you to think about this. And I don't know if you've ever known that because we haven't really talked about this stuff that much.
Yeah.
But I used to, like I said, I watched you from childhood going right on up to your current state and living with Panacea Pussycat in New Orleans and doing a lot of really amazing stuff. But also coming more grounded, becoming kind of centered and in many ways just developing into a comfortable space. Exactly. But I watched you through a lot of uncomfortable spaces, trying to figure things out. What do you think that was about? Because that's where I'm like, you were born in suburbia. Why aren't you?
Deep insecurity, nervousness, self-hatred, depression. And meeting my wife, meeting Panacea, changed me. Her optimism or her
outlook,
positive outlook at all costs, which has its own drawbacks, that kind of way of moving through life. But that it slowly changed me, and I'm better for it, for sure. But yeah, I was an uncomfortable, self-hating, nervous teenager way longer than a person should be.
And it's funny because I think that you just
And it's still there.
So we'll come back to that for a second, because I think that's something that we all have still, but hopefully less intensely. That's part of getting better, at least from a psychiatric perspective. That's part of where you grow and realize that you've changed into something not so self-loathing that we thought we were. But it's interesting because why do you think you were so hard on yourself?
I don't think it's that I was hard on myself. I think that it was that I felt like I had to convince myself of my own genius, or I would sink.
Right.
And I think a lot of it was my mother. A lot of it was proving. I'm sorry, I'm going to go there.
But, no, that wasn't it. It was the motorcycle I was saying.
Oh, motorcycle.
Yeah, no.
Part of life.
So that's right. Part of it was, go on.
It proving to my parents.
Like your value.
Yeah, that this was a viable option, and that I was born to do this and nothing else.
So I asked you last night, and
that was like, maybe that was the conflict. I don't know. I don't think a lot about this. I don't.
Welcome to sitting with a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
This is.
So all I can do is like consider it in this moment that you're posing the question to me, but I don't want to give. Yeah, I just don't. I don't really know, but certainly, being aware that I probably wasn't built for much else other than this kind of life was terrifying, and then doubly terrifying growing up in a family that was pretty rightfully nervous about that for their firstborn son. It's fucking terrifying.
Why were they rightfully nervous?
And I would be terrified. I don't have kids, and maybe that's why, but I'd be terrified too.
Why?
Because it is a hard road to hoe.
Well, being a kid is a hard road to hoe too.
Being a kid is a hard road to hoe, but you got a kid who's like, I want to write songs and paint doodles for my whole entire life. So, like you, the first thought in my mind would be like, Jesus, that means I got to pay for this moron for the next 60 years.
So this is where you and I grew up very differently, which I think is fascinating. What do you think would happen in my house if Holden said, I want to write songs and make doodles the rest of my life?
Here's a paintbrush,
Right. Let's buy you some more paint.
Drum down, up, down, up.
So there's this great concept, which I actually think is really important in mental health. It's called Poorness of fit. And this is something we're starting to look at a lot. As a child psychiatrist, I have to look at this a lot. And what I mean by that is an outlier within a group. If you are a very mellow person and you are born into a mellow family, everybody kind of works. Mm-hmm. If you're a really type A kind of person, you're born into a type A kind of family, it generally works. Everybody kind of understands. But when you are and this is where genes is so important, why I say there's genetics, it's not just environment. If it were, everybody would turn out the way their parents were. I
think in my case, it is a strong argument for some genetics going
Absolutely.
on. Because there was every reason to just kind of take a different path and availability and support for that, but it was just impossible.
Well, see, that's the Poorness of fit model, right? You were born into an expectation which did not fit for you. It was an alien perspective, and that I think that is where a lot of conflict came in.
An expectation, but it wasn't that classic 1930s like, if father was a dentist, you will be a dentist. I own the dry goods store, you will own. It wasn't that.
No, but it was a lawyer or a professional
whatever.
or
just please, dear God, not
an artist.
An organ playing lunatic.
Probably one of the reasons that your father was always worried when my mom would come to visit.
I don't remember him being worried about that. I don't know. But your parents, when we can't really go this conversation without talking about them about that, they were proof that it was possible.
Yeah.
And maybe without them, I would have caved or gone in some different way.
So it was necessary to have that alternative view.
They were
you can
absolutely
do this.
Role models in my fantasy brain all the time, whether they were there or not. And for the longest time, up well into my 20s, I thought I was going to move to New Mexico and do the same thing.
And instead you moved to New Orleans and did the same thing, basically.
I guess so.
That was your adopted home.
But yeah.
Yeah, but Santa Fe was an adopted home for them that they discovered because it had a creative energy that meant something to them.
And then I realized, like, that's their, you find your own way.
Correct. You find your own place.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you said that, going back to the kind of poorness of fit thing, right? It's really fascinating because do you think in some ways having to prove that, though?
Poorness of fit?
Poorness,
poor fit, bad fit.
Bad fit, okay. Right? Poorness of fit. The idea is I don't quite fit I'm the black sheep. And artists are often
I never felt
sheep.
like a black sheep, really. And I don't know. It's because my father is kind of my hero.
Okay.
Like, I really, I have a lot of him.
A lot of engineering and stuff.
A lot of engineering interest and problem solving. And although I didn't get into cars, and I'm never sure why, I love to take things apart. And
you always have.
And our relationship never fractured, ever, my father and I. And probably because he wasn't the major one around. He had 10,000 jobs and was in the military and didn't have the job of sort of reacting to
raising you
my shenanigans on a daily basis. But there was never a rift. He was always like somebody I could ask questions and always responded to anything I did with at least some thoughtfulness and consideration of, what's really going on here.
Yeah. Whereas with your mom, it tended to be more reactionary.
Much more reactionary and emotional, and I'm and that just didn't suit well for me. My brother did better with that.
Well, he's a lawyer.
Yeah, and eventually I figured it out, and I was like, she's just an eccentric woman, and she's probably somebody I'd be great friends with. I'm friends with a lot of people that have these same tendencies in my life. I actually
had a good
now.
relationship with your mom. It's interesting because, I remember distinctly when I was in college, one of the times when I was up visiting, and we went out to lunch or dinner or something like that. It was just her and I, and we were talking. And she was asking me all these questions about my liberal nature and stuff with an open mind, asking, well, why that and why this and why that? And I thought it was so fascinating because I'm like, why couldn't you have this conversation with your own kids? You can't. I
guess not, yeah. I was very aware of that that thing in her being a pretty cool lady, but very not that way with her kids, and especially with me. Well,
and I think that's one of the reasons why, even like psychiatrists and doctors, we really shouldn't probably be too much of that for our own kids because we're too wrapped up in the, I always said my whole goal as a child psychiatrist is to screw my kid up really badly. So far I'm not doing too good a job at that, but I'm working on it.
She seems okay.
Yeah, I'm working on it. But they seem pretty grounded at this point. But
you got a couple of years.
Yeah. Well, they're getting into those years. But although it might just keep scratching my head more than anything else, rather than anything, I just kind of go, okay. All right. So I'm going to guess, and I actually said this, and you never told me this. We've never talked about this, but I'm going to guess that growing up, you probably got stuck in therapy pretty often. Like, you're not what is expected. Not happened?
Nope.
Never.
I don't know why, but I know that it was discussed, and that there was a lot of behind the scenes evaluation of what might be wrong with me. And what ended up happening was getting pulled from public school and sent to special school for a couple of years, which only reinforced my belief that there are others out there like me, because it was full of wackadoodle queer artists that were either hiding or few and far between in public school, and it just sent me deeper down the rabbit hole. And then they yanked me out of that and put me back in public school.
Isn't that
the damage had been done. Genie was fully out the bottle.
So then over the years, have you... I know you're fighting... We don't want to talk about it, but I know you're fighting with leukemia, right? It was... Or lymphoma.
Lymphoma.
Right. And we don't... And you're doing okay, right?
Yeah. They tell you to not call it remission when it's stage 4 because it's in your...
Both sides. And
bone marrow and all, whatever. So the expectation is that someday it will return, but it's one of the most highly funded cancers as far as treatment. And I got some experimental... I went through chemo and lost the hair and did all that. and then chose to do. And my dad helped me through all this and helped me make these decisions and stuff, and came down to New Orleans. It was all on Medicaid, public hospital.
I know.
Thank God, because I think God bless the Medicaid system in New Orleans. It's amazing.
And I wish we could just get that through to everybody and have a little bit broader sense of that exact medical model. Yes.
But anything that reaches the testing phase has been run through the ringer,
right?
So much that and if it's and eventually what I chose to do as a test therapy after chemo became standard of care, or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really kind of knocked it out. And I have not had my scans have been clean since 2013.
And that's awesome. And I remember when all of that was going on, because I was actually in medical school at that time, and then transitioning into my residency, because I was during that whole period. So I know that it was I was following it from the back end. Mm-hmm. And when they said, it had crossed the midline, I knew what that meant. That put it into the stage 4 and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was dire.
Yeah. So. But that's physical health,
and that probably is one of the events in my life that because you've known me for a long time, I'm much more comfortable in my skin now than I have been.
That's what I was going to say. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'm still not comfortable in my own skin, and anyways, but
we'll go there. Don't worry.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is maybe just genetic, just whatever I am. But almost seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, and then coming out of it, there wasn't an epiphany moment or anything, but it definitely settled me in a way.
So, was there a time period where you were worried about your own? Because, everybody worries that, he's eccentric or different. That's why your parents had that conversation of, do we need to worry about this mental health thing? And I love to say, if somebody is, functioning well, I think we talked a little about this, if they're functional, it's not a big deal. You can be an artist and be functional. It's when you're having these conflicts. Did you have a point when you kind of reached this, I think I've got some things I need to work on my own mental health with?
Yes.
And when was that?
Fleetingly different points in my life. I've had some seeing things, hearing things, kind of, but they always go away. And then definitely there's some kind of depressive tendency that I'm more and more now. I'm like, is this something I deal with it by drinking.
Okay.
And I always have.
Yeah. By the way, that's a coping skill. It's just not a necessarily great one.
Right. Yeah. And sometimes it's worse than others, but it works, but also it doesn't really solve anything. But I don't believe it's solvable either, and I don't want to take drugs.
Except alcohol.
No. Party drugs. Give it to me all day long.
Let me rephrase that. I love to say you don't want to take prescribed medications if they're ones that you choose.
Just ones from people that I don't know on the street.
Thank you for at least
could possibly be something else.
I love because I'm
I don't
always
trust anything other than that.
I'm always getting into that conversation with my patients. It's like, I don't want your medication. I'm like, but you're using alcohol, marijuana. Well, yeah, but I don't know. Those are natural. Okay.
Yeah.
But
back to your question. I've never ever felt like I'm mentally ill or anything like that. And
what does that mean?
Maybe I don't know what it means, but to me it's not me, and maybe that's
right.
our generation too. I was never like, I think kids now, they want to have some label diagnosis. Friends, a lot of my milieu are younger people, millennials and younger, and they have this, they have ADHD and this, right, and that and that. And when I was growing up, I was like, no, I'm normal. This
right.
is normal. I am fucking normal. I did not want to have any of those things.
Which is not changed a lot. It's starting to with the younger generation, but it's still really hard. And I want to actually mention something, because you talked about, I don't know what mental illness is. I don't see myself as mentally ill. And there's a big movement, and I'm actually part of this in a lot of ways, to change the whole wording so we get away from mental illness and start going towards mental health. And you'll notice when I talk about what do you think about mental health? Physical health is when you're not suffering or struggling with anything that's preventing you from doing the things you want to do, right? You could actually have lymphoma, right, and be still in remission And I would call you right now physically healthy. You're in a space where things are fine. There's nothing. So mental health really, I think, is more about when we're not in a place where we feel like we're mentally healthy. And that's where, so let's go back, because you said, I'm not mentally ill. That's not it. But there's been plenty of places.
I am aware of acting against my own best interests sometimes.
Okay.
And I don't know why. But I don't think it's mentally ill. It's something else.
Why is it something else?
I don't know.
I mean, let's say that we are
It's just being a lazy piece of shit sometimes.
Now, see, I don't actually ever agree with the word lazy. Lazy person likes to sit on the couch and eat Cheetos and doesn't feel guilty about it. There aren't many of those.
Yeah.
But a person who's depressed and doesn't have the motivation to get up off the couch because things they would normally like to do, they can't, because their brain's just not giving them the energy. So they spend the time on couch. That's depression, right? I mean, that's saying so.
And I'm saying it facetiously.
I know you
laziness. I think lazy can be very beneficial. I wrote a song about this once. The chorus was "Lazy makes the world go round," and it's some of most of your great ideas come from contemplation,
correct,
and non-activity. And it's why museums are so important, and art museums and art in general is so important, but especially places where you can go. In this day and age, especially when everything is on a screen, to go into a museum, it is a temple of contemplation. It is a place where you are supposed to. And I used to think, like, why am I not even, I don't care about this painting, and there's all these paintings. I'm going to walk around like everybody else. But what you're doing is you're contemplating yourself and your own work and your own life, and you're helping yourself, whether I'm looking at those. Sometimes something will catch my eye and I'll linger, but it's.
You're immersing in an environment, and that's what you don't get on a screen, and that's what people don't understand. Yeah. So, but back to this whole idea, what, you said you dallied, at times you went. What has your experience been? Like, if I say to you, what do you think of when you think of psychiatrist or therapist? What comes to mind?
Somebody to talk to who is not your family and doesn't have any reason to give you the benefit of the doubt or reason to believe you or disbelieve you.
Okay.
I think it's, for some people, very beneficial probably to have a neutral party to unload on.
How about you?
I did it of my own volition briefly right before Katrina. Mm-hmm. And then everything got wiped off the face of the earth, and then everybody was,
Was it helpful at all? Or was it an experience?
I don't think it was helpful.
So my dad always said the best psychiatrist for my dad was an adobe wall.
For me, it is actually sitting down and doing work.
Yes.
I absolutely know that the way to get out of the hole is to fucking sit down at the keyboard and turn on the PA and do it.
Or the electrical bench and work on, soldering. Or
listening to music. The thing during COVID, I kind of went, like everybody, into a dark place. And the thing that unburied me was not trying to do work of my own, but listening to other people's work. And I really dug into I have a enormous collection of organ records, big connoisseur of all kinds of organ music. Yeah. Right. And I was like, let's really dig into this collection and talk about it. And I talked about it online, and then really dug into why I liked these artists and what I liked about organ music in general. And it completely lifted the fog. It was amazing.
Yeah.
To focus on other artwork.
But that goes right back to my point of art as a coping skill, art as therapy. I mean, I think that's what we forget. I think, one of two things happens. We find those things that give us meaning, and we bury ourselves in them, and they give us meaning and help us through hard times. Or we don't. And that's oftentimes where it's interesting when I talk about psychiatry and therapy, because I go through a kind of a juggling act. Are we useful? Are we not useful? I mean, I think we are. I do. But for certain things. But when somebody's lost meaning, that's where I think it's more helpful. If you've got meaning, you can find it in something, especially art, which goes back to that basic needs, not high up here. I think it can be more therapeutic than almost anything else.
For sure. And that's why I feel like I don't need... I know what to do. I don't feel like I need to go talk to somebody.
So why do you need to do that?
I just need to.
Would you have been you if you'd have been born, say, in Santa Fe? You think so?
I don't know. Me, what do you mean? I would have been me, of course.
Well, yeah, I know that. But let's say, would you have been Quintron if you'd have been born in a very different family, very creative, very artistic, who basically said, yeah, go do your own thing? I'm not saying you wouldn't have been creative or an artist. That's not what I'm saying. Would you have been you?
Probably to a large degree. Yeah, I think the outcome would have been different.
Yeah.
But I think what I do would be probably really different. But I would certainly be me.
Why would it be different, though?
I don't know, because that didn't happen to me. I had the family that I had, but and I can't. If I was to guess, I would only be guessing.
Yeah. Well, but so observationally, from my watching you and stuff like that, and tell me what you think. I remember when you used to like pin your eyebrows in and stuff like that. You always struck me as somebody who was trying to invent yourself, not in a bad way, but you were trying to invent yourself in a way that said, this is who I am, and most people don't get it. And I'm assuming that mostly we're talking about conservative kind of people don't really get what's going on, because you had plenty of people who did, but not people who didn't. And I thought it was really interesting watching you, because I used to, we would have conversations, like mom and dad and stuff like that. You were always one of our people we loved to watch going on, developing and becoming who you were. And I used to say, gosh, he's trying to invent himself. And then later on in life, I said, you did. And you became who you were, because if you live a certain way long enough, you become that.
Maybe you're right. I don't think if I had the family upbringing that you had, I would have had to try so hard.
You wouldn't have the anger.
I wouldn't have to try so hard.
You wouldn't have that resistance.
I definitely tried really hard, and maybe.
And I'm not saying I'm not judging it as a good or a bad. I'm saying it may have been a necessary thing. Is that because you grew up in a model that did not fit and did not feel right and did not feel good, and you still wanted that model to accept you. If you think about it, right, you still wanted, you said it, your mom and dad to truly accept who you were. And maybe they were, your dad's different, as you say, but maybe your mom was never really prepared to accept an artist kid. Who knows? I mean, I think maybe in her own way she probably was. But in an external way, didn't get it. It made you have to do things differently than if you had fit into the molds that was expected. So I think, my conjecture is, it was crucial that actually being born in St. Louis in a family that was not necessarily oriented towards the value of art for art, not talking about it as a coping skills we're talking about, but as a value system in some ways.
Yeah, and I want to be very careful to not paint my family upbringing as this anti-art,
they weren't.
religious,
No.
conservative upbringing. There was value on art and music, and there were artists in the family way back on different.
Well, no, but it's the questions I'm curious about, because I've wondered often about the difference, and if you are growing up, I think I grew up very different. I think if I would have grown up black, I'd have been a militant, probably terrorist. That's what I think. I think I don't like being put down or belittled, even as a white male, the highest potential power structure in the United States of America. Growing up in New Mexico, I certainly know what it was like to be a minority in some ways, but that's neither here nor there. But the reality is, I think I would have been the most angry minority I can possibly think of, because I'm an angry white man, so it's pretty sure I would have been I would have been a really dangerous angry minority. I really do think I would have. So I think that's why it's important. That's why I'm so curious about formative. I mean, I wouldn't have changed your upbringing for you to be
a lot of weed. Anyways.
So yeah, I want to be careful as well. It's not my goal. But I believe you're fighting the upbringing you were in was important. I think it was. I think,
and not just familial, but
correct.
Where I was,
St.
and
Louis.
other students in high school. And St. Louis is at least where I was, very, very conservative place to be, and the people I worked with.
So I think it was formative, and I think probably the thing that I'm most impressed with is the person you've become out of all of that. Because at some point you could have self-destructed quite easily. I mean, and don't you think that was a risk at points in your life? For
sure, and it's probably a part of the terror on the part of my mother and father, or that unbeaten path can land in a lot of bad places.
So, I think the expectation was the problem. In other words, the expectation that you can't be happy, productive, make a decent living, be as an artist is the problem. It's not the path, it's the expectation. On one hand, if somebody expects you can do that, there's no fear. You go off in one direction. On the other hand, if there's a fear that you can't do it, you have to fight it. And you either give up and go on and say, okay, or you self-destruct, or you become who you become, meaning I am who I am. My mom talks about that all the time. I mean, she grew up in a very conservative and did not get along with her mother much at all. And her mom and dad, especially her mom, had no understanding. Ganny had no understanding.
Yeah, your mom and I have talked about this a lot.
Of what it was like. And, and I think that, mom was not built or genetically designed to be a debutante, which is what I think Ganny would have been most.
Really? A debutante?
A proper Southern woman who knew how to properly handle things and what people's places were nicely, so that you didn't have to be insulting about who came to the front door, the back door, all of those things. I think that would have been, but I think that in many ways, mom had sort of a either change or actually become true to myself or die kind of position. That's why she moved to Santa Fe. That's why she got away from all of that stuff. Yeah. And I think that's, I love my grandmother a lot, but the reality still was, I think the poorness of fit is what made my mom uniquely my mom.
Yeah. And you got to just jump off the cliff sometimes, too. You got to prove it to yourself. I think you have to. I just only graduated high school. I went to some college and I yanked myself out to jump off the cliff.
And I think that's the point. I think some people have to go to college and do it, and some other people don't have to go to college. And some people have to go to art school, and other people don't have to go to art school. And I think that the problem is when we try to do what we don't think we need to do. And that's that coming back. It's like everybody expects us to do X, and it doesn't feel right, but we do it anyways. That's where self-destruction generally comes from. When did you decide my life is actually going in a decent direction?
I think when I moved to New Orleans.
Okay.
And married Miss Pussycat.
Yeah.
Probably.
Why?
Because I had met the love of my life, mostly. And somebody who also grew up in a family that was not exactly, it was not a normal thing. To do that and to go through it together, and
I'd suggest you.
It was before that I knew that this is the path, but as far as starting to be comfortable and feeling like, we can do this.
Well, one of the clear things about Panacea is that she really accepts you for who you are.
Yeah, amazingly.
No, I mean, why is that so shocking to you?
Because I more and more realize what a handful I am. You live with yourself 100% of the time.
Right. We also
do not realize you get cut. Everybody cuts themselves a lot of slack.
Oh, I would say as a psychiatrist, everybody is the hardest on themselves than anybody else.
Well, there's that too. It just depends on how you look at it. But
in essence, I think it's interesting because I think the point was she actually saw you for who you were and felt like you were. And that's something you've never, or at least for a long time, in many ways, hadn't really experienced from somebody you really respected and loved.
Well, not like that. But as soon as I left St. Louis, I found, and even in like the special school that I went to, you find your people, find your people,
your tribe.
And then the goal is for a long time is to find more and more and more of them, and develop community.
Right.
But as far as like an intimate relationship with and we're not collaborators.
Yeah.
We're just cohabitators really, and we're both too stubborn, and we're like a dual-headed Napoleon or something. But we support each other and we help each other.
Isn't that the best relationship?
I don't know. We try, and it is very difficult.
But I mean, two people who refuse to become what somebody else expects them to become is probably the healthiest.
Probably. Ain't nobody playing second fiddle.
Exactly. Right. So
two people going.
Yeah, except
and then like,
except
will you
you're
tune my
doing
fiddle, and will you rebuild my fiddle, and will you paint a bird on my fiddle? Okay.
So I think what's happened is I do think you found, I think finding your tribe is an important concept, which goes back to that whole thing of finding where we fit. Why do you still have, because you certainly, you just said we give ourselves a lot of slack. No, we don't. You don't either. You said there's still a lot of self-loathing in there. Why?
Because I know I can be better and that I just am not.
But isn't
I know I can do better.
But isn't that the
and
goal?
Work harder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you stop trying?
Well, sometimes.
Well, nobody's progressing all the time, but are you better now than you were 2 years ago?
Yeah.
So right. So I think the evidence is you're doing exactly what your goal is to improve. The problem is you're not perfect.
Yeah, or not improving at a rapid enough rate. I still can't read music.
I still can't not get mad at stupid things. So, the reality is I'm a psychiatrist who tells just, hey, pick your battles. And yet I'm sitting there flipping the guy off who's cutting me off in traffic. So let's wrap this up.
Let's wrap it up.
I do want to ask you again because we lost it. So I want to ask you again, if, we were talking about how in interviews people never hit the point, or they don't ask you, or they don't reach, or they don't talk, or they don't listen. We were actually talking about how they're not really listening a lot of times. What is it you'd like them to hear that has you've never really gotten them to?
I think the reason that most people who are interviewed frequently become belligerent is not always to the point of Lou Reed belligerent, but with interviewers and frustrated and tired is because for the most part they are just they're hunters trying to capture something to save their own skins, to keep their job, to turn in their golden stars. They don't really care about what they're asking about. They don't care about the work, and you can smell it from a mile away.
So have you had
totally different interviews? I want them to do is care, but you can't make somebody care. You can just tell, and if they don't, you either, if you're polite, you give your pat answers and you say yada-da-da-da, and you hope that you sell 3 more records than had you not done the interview. And if they do care, you have a genuine conversation with somebody who could be a friend.
So curiosity is a huge element. Do you find that that's it?
Curiosity on the part of the question asker?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what have you felt like has never really been touched on that you wish had been?
I think some people have, and I can't name names because I can't remember them sometimes. But I feel like the best interviews would probably be conducted by like a relative or a friend. That's who's gonna, any other, most 99% of the time an interviewer will touch on like, you invent stuff. Tell me about that. What's Drum Buddy and they want to paint the wacky scientist paintbrush, and Miss Pussycat is the crazy puppeteer who started in church.
Right.
They take the big broad stroke picture and just try to enhance it, shine a light on it, and then be done with it. And it's the most generic, boring thing that you can do with somebody. But if somebody's craft involves making melodies and writing words for whatever it is, the play or a song or whatever, there's secrets in there. Look there. If you give a shit, there's secrets that we are begging you to care about and look at and unlock, and maybe they're not for you, but maybe they are for you. So I think what I always want is like for somebody to go there and have questions about it.
Yeah. It's interesting because when we were talking, you almost had a surprise when I was talking about music as a coping skill. And I said, did music save your life, or is music a way for you to truly, cope with the world around you and all of the difficulties? And I think at first you kind of were, well, I didn't think about it that way. But what do you think now?
I'm forgetting the details of that train of thought that we were on. But I've never thought of it as a coping mechanism. It's just more of a compulsion.
Maybe it's just a definition of the word. You
Perhaps.
have to do it. Why do you have to do it?
Because life doesn't have much meaning without feeling like I've said something in a new way, at least to me, or sometimes it's just the activity. It's a form of self-hypnosis, I know, for me, rocking back and forth and going.
By the way,
it's like,
that's a coping mechanism. Rocking is a way of relaxing. It's a way of grounding ourselves, a way of kind of focusing. I need to get away from all the noise that's going on around me and put myself back in.
Turn it up and rock.
Then that's, once again, you said it nicer than I did. The word coping skills and stuff just has too much of a, I mean, it has a clinical sense to it, and I understand I'm a clinician. But what I mean is, it's a necessity for you to be who you are, to survive as you are, to actually respond to things in the world that you would not normally feel comfortable responding in one way, but you can do it through music.
And even to engage with all the things in the world that are there to be talked about and thought about and have opinions formed on. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, and I did not go to school and study these things, but if you have a way to frame them, everybody has their own way of framing things, and I don't even want to call it saying something about it, but that's my method for engaging in those conversations.
I think it's been a really interesting, at least, chance to kind of get to think about things in ways that hopefully you haven't thought about and that I haven't either. That's the whole point of this.
Yeah.
So.
I wish more interviews were like this, because this is the important stuff, really. Not what's your new record, and let's dial up to 11 all the facets of your personality that everybody already knows from seeing your work and on television or other interviews or whatever. It's a lot of that is false anyways, or it's dialed up for a reason.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I'm not gonna go. I could talk with you, Rob.
Yeah.
You and I know we know each other a long time. We've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
I just called you Rob, Mr. Quintron, for the
That's
reality
fine,
of the reality.
And I have never, ever been like a stickler about anybody that knows me as this name and calls me that. I never have corrected anybody. It's whatever you're comfortable with. And I got the name Quintron not by self-naming myself. It happened very organically. It actually comes from
your dad's job at one point.
A company that he was instrumental in starting was called Quintron, and I think I was still in high school.
I remember that.
I found it to be this hilarious, fake, futuristic company name, and I was like, I'm going to name my next band that. And then I also really because a lot of my early stuff was totally solo.
Okay. And
it means 5 particles in Latin, Quintron, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The brain. And so I thought that was appropriate for like a one-man band thing,
sure.
Which is what I was doing.
Because you're using you were using everything.
But it was painted on the side of my touring van by somebody else, tagged our van. I was like, oh, that's cool. They painted my one-man band name on there.
They tagged your van with your name.
At a festival, at the Dripping Springs, some total hippie festival opening for Crash Worship in Dripping Springs, Texas. So he painted it on there, and then the tour ensued, and then people just started calling me that, and I was like, I'm gonna roll with the new fake name.
I think.
And then and coinciding with that, I had moved to a new town, and had all new people.
Well, and Miss Pussycat calls you Mr. Q
and
or
she
Quintron.
never called
never
me anything else. No,
That's right.
She never did.
That's right. I mean, and
so it really happened in conjunction with moving to a new place and starting this new project, and then having somebody it's a one-word thing. It's memorable.
Yeah.
But,
But I think, like I said, and I mentioned this earlier, it's just really nice to see how it's come full circle, in the sense that you were so busily hard working on trying to invent someone when you were younger, which I remember watching and stuff, and now being just really not the creation of your own invention, but an acceptance in your skin, starting to become more comfortable, and with all that extra stuff that you have added throughout the years, it all become you, rather than part of it's a real you, part of it's not a real you. I think it's a disingenuous question anymore to even say what's the real you.
Yeah, that's an impossible question. Have you ever come across in your work a teenager or even like an early 20-something person that is comfortable in their own skin, that has like an old soul, or that is
So yes,
Because I have just in
They're
life, and
rare.
it's weird,
Yeah,
and amazing.
even Rose, in some ways, is more comfortable in their skin than I would give them credit for because of that's my child with the blue hair and
Yep.
everything. And I sit there and say, "What are you trying?"
mean, but-
Because I notice it because they don't ever correct me if I accidentally say she anymore as opposed
Yeah,
to they.
I noticed that.
Yeah, there's no reactionary to it. And I think the only thing that explains that, because we've talked about it, they and I have had that conversation, is it's okay. I know who I am. That's
Yeah.
a strange statement. I know who I am. Especially
You've
coming from a
done good.
13-year-old
You did a good
kid. You're
job
like,
with that
okay,
one.
I don't know who they are, but they know who they are. I'm
Yeah.
okay with that. Whereas I think so many of us did not know.
No,
Now,
I didn't. I was not that kid.
and yet I was in some ways. If you remember when we were
You
young, I
were.
always
You
had
were
this idea
way,
of,
way before
who
me.
am I? I'm this
Yeah.
crazy. I don't know. I couldn't even say who
You
I
were an
was.
only child, and there's a lot of factors going on, and you had a supportive.
You're saying environment?
Yeah, I am saying environment. Yeah,
Yeah. It is an interesting thing, isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah. Hey, it's been fun. We could do this again more.
Okay.
All right. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think we've covered a lot.
I really appreciate
feel-
it, Quintron.
Yeah, it was nice to come do some work.
It was fun. Thanks.
All right.
I'll,
Like and subscribe.
I always forget to do that. Thank you. Like
Yeah.
and subscribe. Okay.
To everything.
Thanks.
All right.
I think that's good.